was put to the test. So I had a mission on the 93 Lions tour to see how many, myself and Stuart Barnes, how many forwards we could put away drinking.
Right.
I was asked this not long ago. Who were the 5 greatest rugby players I ever saw? And I said, well, how long have you got? Because 5 isn't very many, is it? I played for quite a long time. I played with Bath with England, went away with the Lions a few times, and you come across an awful lot of good rugby players doing that. Some of them you remember because they did something extraordinary. Others you remember because they made your life absolutely miserable for 80 minutes. And there are a few I probably appreciated more after I stopped playing than I did at the time. That's the funny thing. When you're actually out there, you don't stand around admiring people. If you're playing against someone, you're trying to beat him. If he's on your side, you're mostly hoping he'll do his job and make yours a little easier. That's about it. We weren't sitting in the dressing room discussing who was going to become a legend. Half the time we were talking rubbish. That's what dressing rooms are like. But I've had years now to look back at it all, and there were certain players who were different. You knew it when you played with them. You certainly knew it when you played against them. Sometimes it was something obvious, pace, strength, skill. Sometimes it wasn't. There were blokes who just seemed to understand what was happening before everybody else did. You'd be looking at one thing and they'd already seen the next thing. Those were the ones I always noticed. So I thought about the question for a while. Not the 5 with the most caps, not the 5 with the biggest reputations. Just the 5 players where I can honestly say, yes, I saw that bloke play rugby and he was something else. A few names came to mind straight away. And the first one really wasn't very difficult. Rory Underwood is one of the first people I think about. And I know everybody immediately talks about his pace. Fair enough. He was quick, very quick. But when you've actually played alongside somebody for years, you stop thinking about the thing everybody else talks about. I didn't spend my time looking at Rory thinking, goodness me, what a fast man. I just knew that if there was a bit of space and Rory was somewhere outside me, life became considerably easier. That's a lovely thing for a centre. You didn't have to make everything perfect for him either. Sometimes the pass wasn't quite where you wanted it. Sometimes the defence had already moved across. Rory would still find something, and he was quiet. That's something I remember. There were plenty of characters around England in those days, plenty of talking, plenty of opinions. Rory wasn't really interested in competing with any of that. He'd get himself ready and get on with it. I like that about him. We spent so much time together with England that you get used to having somebody around, training sessions, hotels, meals, sitting around waiting for things to happen. International rugby sounds terribly glamorous when you're young. There's actually quite a lot of waiting and quite a lot of bad conversation. Rory was simply easy company. Then Saturday came and suddenly this quiet bloke you'd been having breakfast with was running away from people. I always found that amusing. People sometimes ask what makes a great winger. I could give them a complicated answer, I suppose. But with Rory, it was fairly simple. If I had the ball and saw him outside me, I wanted to give it to him. You trust certain players like that. You don't think about it. You just know they've got a better chance of doing something useful with the ball than you have. And I saw Rory do that for England over and over again. I played with some very good wings, played against some bloody good ones too. But if you asked me to go back and pick somebody to stand outside me again, I'd be quite happy seeing Rory Underwood there. Will Carling has to be on here. I spent too much time with him for him not to be. And Will was an interesting bloke because everybody outside the England side had an opinion about him. That comes with being captain, I suppose. People saw the interviews, they saw him talking to the press, they saw the face on television every week and decided they knew exactly what sort of person he was. We saw something slightly different. I saw the bloke in the dressing room. I saw him when things weren't going particularly well. And believe me, there were days when they didn't. Will took a lot of that on himself, probably too much sometimes. That's what captains do, though. If England lost, everybody wanted to know what Will thought about it. If England won, they wanted to know what Will thought about that as well. The rest of us could disappear and have a drink. Poor Will normally had another interview to do. I never envied him that. As a player, what I liked about him was that he wasn't complicated. He was strong, he was direct, and he wasn't frightened of anybody. That mattered, especially playing in the centre. There are days when you know you're going to spend most of the afternoon running into fairly large men. It's nice to look across and see someone who doesn't seem particularly bothered by that. Will was like that. We played a lot of rugby together, and after a while you learn what somebody is going to do without having a meeting about it every 5 minutes. That's probably what I remember most. There wasn't always some grand tactical conversation. Sometimes Will would look at me, I'd look at him, and that was enough. Then we'd probably get it wrong anyway. That's rugby. But I trusted him. And I think that's something you appreciate more when you're older. You forget quite a few scores. You forget exactly who did what in certain matches, but you don't forget the people you were comfortable standing beside when things got difficult. For a lot of my England career, Will Carling was one of those people. Martin Johnson was one of those blokes you were quite pleased to have on your side. That's probably the easiest way of saying it. Jono wasn't someone who walked into breakfast and suddenly everybody stopped talking. He wasn't like that. Most mornings he'd just sit down, eat his food, have a bit of a chat and get on with the day. Nothing particularly dramatic. Then you'd see him a few hours later on a rugby field and think, well, I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. I got to know him properly through the Lions, and Lions tours are funny things. You bring together a group of players who normally spend the season trying to beat each other, put them in the same hotels, on the same buses, around the same breakfast tables, and tell them they're teammates now. It can take a while. Jono didn't make any fuss about it. He was just Jono. By the time we went to South Africa in 1997, I knew exactly what I was getting from him. If things became difficult, he wasn't going anywhere. And against South Africa, things usually became difficult fairly quickly. I remember looking at some of the work the forwards were doing and thinking I had a pretty good job standing out in the centres. They could keep that. Jono seemed to enjoy it. Or perhaps enjoy isn't the right word. He certainly never complained about it. That's what made him special to me. There was nothing fancy about the way he carried himself. He didn't need to keep telling you how important the next match was. We all knew. You didn't need to tell everyone he was tough either. We knew that as well. You could have all the clever backs in the world, but sometimes you just wanted a big bloke up front who wasn't going to move backwards. Jono gave you that feeling. I remember standing behind him on those Lions days and thinking, right, we're all right here. That's a good feeling to have before a test match. And there weren't many players who gave me that feeling quite like Martin Johnson did. Euan Evans was a lovely rugby player. I played against him plenty of times, and then you go away with the Lions and suddenly the Welsh winger you've been trying to stop is sitting at the same table as you. That's one of the things I always liked about the Lions. It changed your opinion of people. You'd see Ieuan in a Wales shirt, and naturally you wanted him to have a terrible afternoon. Then you'd get to know him and think, actually, he's a really good bloke. Annoying, really. It would have been much easier if I didn't like him. Ieuan had that bit of class about him. And I don't mean he walked around telling everybody how good he was. Quite the opposite. He was easy to be around. No drama. No need to be the loudest man in the room. But once the game started, you noticed him. I remember playing with him on the Lions tour to New Zealand in 1993. New Zealand wasn't exactly the sort of place where a winger could expect a quiet afternoon. You knew what was coming. And Ieuan never seemed frightened by any of it. That was important to me. I always admired backs who still wanted the ball when things weren't going well. It's easy to look good when your forwards are going forward and you've got acres of space. It's rather different when somebody is trying to put you into the advertising boards. Euan still wanted it. And as a centre, you notice that if you've got a winger outside you who really wants the ball, you start looking for him. Sometimes I'd see Ieuan out there and think, just get it into his hands and see what happens. Quite often, something did. But the thing I remember now isn't really a particular try. It's the bloke himself. All those years later, that's what tends to happen. You remember the conversations, the travelling, sitting around after training, having a laugh about something that probably wasn't funny to anybody else. Ieuan was one of those players I was glad rugby allowed me to know, even if I would have preferred him to be a little slower whenever he was wearing red. Jonah Lomu. I don't think I can leave him out. And the funny thing is, when people ask me about Jonah, they usually expect some complicated explanation of what made him different. There really isn't one. You only had to look at him, then you had to watch him run. That was enough. I remember the World Cup in 1995 very well. Obviously, I do. England played New Zealand in the semi-final, and Jonah had one of those afternoons that you don't particularly enjoy when you're wearing the other shirt. We knew about him before the match. Of course we did. It's not as though somebody forgot to mention the enormous New Zealand winger. We'd watched him. We'd talked about him. We knew what he could do. Then the match starts and knowing doesn't help very much. That's the difference. You can sit in a team meeting and say, right, this is how we'll deal with him. Sounds wonderful. Then Jonah gets the ball. Now you've actually got to do it. I remember watching him coming at us and thinking how strange it was to see a man that size moving that quickly. It didn't look right. Big men weren't supposed to move like that. And quick men weren't supposed to be that big. Jonah somehow got both. People still talk about what he did to us that day, and fair enough. I've heard about it often enough over the years. You learn to laugh. You have to. But I never felt embarrassed about saying he was extraordinary. Sometimes you simply come across somebody who can do things you can't really explain. Jonah was like that. And there was another side to him as well. Off the field, he wasn't this terrifying figure people imagined from watching him play. That's always one of the funny things about rugby. A bloke can spend 80 minutes frightening the life out of you, then afterwards he's perfectly pleasant. I saw a lot of wonderful players during my time. Some had beautiful hands, some understood space better than anybody else. Some were unbelievably tough. But I never saw another Jonah Lomu. And unfortunately for us, in 1995, we got a very good look at him. Looking back, I suppose the thing that strikes me is how lucky I was. You don't really understand that when you're playing. At the time, rugby is just your life. You train, you play, you get knocked about a bit, you go back to the hotel, you have something to eat. Somebody tells a terrible story you've already heard 3 times, and then you get up and do it all again. It all feels quite normal. Then you stop playing. A few years go by, and suddenly you realize the people standing around you weren't normal rugby players at all. Rory could do things with his pace that made the rest of us look rather slow. Will carried an England side and all the nonsense that came with being captain. Jono was the sort of bloke you wanted nearby when things became uncomfortable. Ieuan was someone I spent years wanting to beat, then discovered I rather enjoyed having on my side. And Jonah. Well, Jonah was Jonah. I'm not sure rugby has produced another one. People will disagree with these 5. Of course they will. That's half the fun of rugby. put 5 old players around a table and ask them to pick the greatest side they've ever seen, and you'll probably still be arguing when somebody turns the lights off. But these are mine. They're the players I remember without having to go away and look anything up. I can still picture them. That's what matters to me. Not how many points somebody scored, not how many matches they played. Just that feeling you had when you saw a player do something and thought, bloody hell, that's good. I had that feeling quite a few times. Sometimes I was standing beside the bloke. Sometimes I was standing opposite him. And if I'm honest, there were 1 or 2 occasions when I would have much preferred to be standing beside him. That's rugby, I suppose. You spend years trying to beat people. Then you get older and realize how fortunate you were to have seen them at all.